Amara, her name in his mouth sounded the way it always had, like something he had always been careful with. She had missed that without meaning to. Jae-ho, she said. He looked at her, at the bag, at her stomach, then at her face. She watched him process all three in sequence. She saw the exact moment when the questions became too large for his expression to contain. 7 months, he said. His voice was very quiet. I know. You were, he stopped, started again. How long have you known? Since before I left. The arrivals hall moved around them. Families reuniting, drivers holding signs, the indifferent chaos of an airport that does not pause for anyone's private reckoning. She had chosen this location deliberately. Public enough that neither of them would lose control of the conversation. Crowded enough that nobody would pay attention to two people standing perfectly still while the world moved around them. We need to talk, she said. Not here. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the roses from the floor. He held them as if he no longer knew what to do with them. Then he set them on a nearby bench. My car is outside, he said. She nodded. She followed him out. 7 months earlier, the knock on the apartment door had come at 10:40 in the evening. She had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea and a phone she had been staring at for an hour, trying to decide who to call. The nausea had started 2 weeks earlier. The test had confirmed what she already knew 3 days after that. She had been trying to find the right moment to tell Jae-ho, only to discover that there was no right moment. There were only moments, and she had to choose one. She opened the door. Director Choi stood outside. She had known Choi for 2 years, Jae-ho's most trusted lieutenant, the man who managed the operational side of the Kwon family holdings with such quiet efficiency that the work seemed indistinguishable from instinct. He had always been polite to her, professionally warm. Not tonight. May I come in? He said. It was not a question. She stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table where she had been sitting and placed a folder between them. Before she opened it, he told her exactly what was inside. Chairman Yoon, the inheritance restructuring that had been in preparation for 22 months, the fabricated alliance agreements designed to redirect the Kwon family holdings away from Jae-ho's bloodline through a legal mechanism buried in a clause his father had never anticipated being exploited. The timeline. 6 months to complete the restructuring. After that, the transfer would be irreversible. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you are the variable, Choi said. Chairman Yoon's team has assessed every obstacle to the transfer. You are the one they cannot fully account for. She looked at the folder. What does he want? He wants you to leave, Choi said. Quietly. Within 48 hours. He paused. If you stay, the restructuring accelerates. The mechanisms they've prepared are significant. Jae-ho could spend years in legal battles that would cost him most of what his father built before any resolution was possible. She was quiet for a moment. And if I go? The restructuring proceeds on the original timeline. 6 months, Jae-ho retains enough of the holdings to rebuild from. He paused. It is not nothing. She looked at him. You came here personally. Yes. Yoon sent you specifically. Yes. Because he knew Jae-ho would listen to you if questions were asked later, she said. And because having you deliver this message makes it look like the decision came from inside the family circle rather than from outside it. Choi was quiet. You are very perceptive, he said. I know. She looked at the folder. Can I see the documents? He opened it. She read everything he had brought. Slowly. Completely. No assumptions about what she would find before she found it. It took 11 minutes. Choi waited without speaking. When she finished, she closed the folder. I will leave, she said. Give me 48 hours. He nodded. He stood and reached for the folder. Leave the documents. He looked at her. These are... I know what they are, she said. Leave them. Pals. Something shifted in his expression. He had come believing he was controlling the conversation. He was beginning to realize he wasn't. He left the documents. Then he left the apartment. She heard the door close behind him. She sat at the kitchen table for exactly 4 minutes. Then she stood. She walked to Jae-ho's private filing cabinet in the study, took out the key she had known the location of for 18 months, and opened it. She began to look. She found what she needed in 40 minutes. 3 documents. The original inheritance agreement dated 11 years ago, signed by Jae-ho's father before the alliance families had identified the clause worth exploiting. An internal communication between Chairman Yoon and Director Choi dated 14 months ago, outlining the restructuring strategy in language specific enough to become damaging in the right hands. In a legal assessment commissioned privately by Jae-ho's father during his final year, a document that identified the bloodline clause, explained its function, and stated explicitly that a direct blood heir would carry veto rights over any inheritance restructuring initiated during the heir's lifetime. Amara photographed all three on her phone. She put the phone in her bag, then she placed the bag beside the front door. For the next 10 minutes, she sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with Jae-ho for 2 years and allowed herself to feel what she was about to do. Not to reconsider it, just to feel it fully before she closed the door on this part of her life and became the person she needed to be for the next 6 months. She thought about telling him. She had already imagined that version of events the moment Choi left. Jae-ho coming home, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, listening to everything. His expression changing in that specific sequence she knew so well, the moment when something he believed about a person or situation stopped making sense, and he had to rebuild the entire picture in his mind. He would have fought. That was the problem. He would have gone directly at Yoon with everything he had. And Yoon's team had been preparing for that response for 22 months. Jae-ho had not been preparing at all. He had not even known the threat existed. A man walking into a fight the other side has spent nearly 2 years preparing for does not win that fight on anger and love alone. She needed 6 months, and she needed to disappear to get them. She picked up her bag. She left her keys on the kitchen table. She did not leave a note. Anything she wrote could be found. Anything she wrote could be used. And she was not going to give Yoon's team a single additional tool. She closed the apartment door behind her, and she did not look back. She had learned a long time ago that the most important thing about moving towards something was the direction of your eyes. She called attorney Lim from the taxi to the airport. It was 11:40 that night. Lim answered on the second ring. She always answered. That was the kind of lawyer she was. I need to disappear for 6 months, Amara said. I need your help, and I need you to tell nobody, including people you trust. Hey, pals. Are you safe? Lim asked. For now. Amara looked out the taxi window. I have 3 documents and a phone. I need to build a legal case before a transfer completes in 6 months. I'll explain everything when I land. Where are you landing? I'll tell you when I know. She ended the call. Seoul moved past the taxi window at midnight, luminous, indifferent, completely unbothered. Amara placed one hand on her stomach. 7 weeks. Nobody knew yet. Nobody except Lim. I know, she whispered. Her hand remained there. I know, we're going to be fine. She believed it. She needed to believe it. So she did. In the car from the airport, Jae-ho drove for 11 minutes without speaking. Amara did not fill the silence. She had learned in 2 years of being with him that his silences were not empty. They were where he processed things too large for an immediate response. Interrupting them never produced anything useful. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled. Just barely. Choi told me you transferred money out of the joint account the night you left. He kept his eyes on the road. He showed me the transaction record. He said you had been planning it. There was no transfer. Amara's voice remained steady. I left with what was in my personal account. Choi fabricated the record. Pals. I know that now, he said. I didn't know it then. What did you believe then? He was quiet for a moment. I believed you had reasons. His hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel. I didn't believe the reasons were what Choi said they were. But I couldn't find you to ask. He managed every lead, Amara said. Every time your people got close to where I was, someone redirected them. She looked at him. That was Choi. I know. Again. The repetition carried the weight of a man who had spent 7 months assembling a picture and had just been handed the pieces he had been missing. Soojin told me some of it 3 weeks ago, he continued. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough. Amara turned toward him. Soojin came to you? She came to me. He paused. She said Yoon's team had placed her in my life. She said I needed to know before the transfer was completed. He looked at Amara briefly. She didn't know about the pregnancy. Nobody did. Nobody except Lim. No. He pulled the car to a stop outside his building. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he asked the question that mattered. How long do we have? 6 days. She looked toward the building. The transfer filing is scheduled for the 7th. We need to file the legal challenge before that window closes. What does the challenge need? The 3 documents I photographed the night I left. 7 months of additional evidence Lim has been building. And the bloodline clause fully documented, with proof that the pregnancy existed before the transfer filing date. He looked at her. You built all of this in 6 months. 7, she corrected him quietly. I had an extra month before the deadline. I used it. He looked at her the way he had the night they first met, with that same focused attention, the specific look of a man encountering something he had not fully anticipated and recalibrating around it. Not overwhelmed, just recalibrating. Come inside, he said. He opened his door. Tell me everything. Amara followed him. For 7 months, she had carried the entire plan alone. Now, for the first time, she was about to put it on the table, and there were only 6 days left. If you're feeling what Jae-ho is feeling right now, subscribe to Afro-Korean Folktales. Like this video, because what Amara built in those 7 months is about to go up against everything Yoon spent 2 years constructing. Keep watching. They sat at his kitchen table, the same table where Choi had sat 7 months earlier, delivering the message that had started everything. Amara noticed that Jae-ho had not moved anything in the apartment. The same chairs, the same cups, the same photograph on the shelf by the window, the one she had taken of the two of them in Busan 2 years ago, when everything had still been simple. She told him everything, from the beginning. The visit, the documents, the taxi to the airport, attorney Lim, the 7 months in a rented apartment in Busan, where she had worked 12 hours a day building the legal challenge now sitting in Lim's office, ready to be filed. He listened without interrupting. That was one of the things she had loved about him from the beginning, the quality of his listening, the complete attention of a man who understood that when someone was telling you something that mattered, the most important thing you could do was simply be present. When she finished, he remained quiet for a long moment. The bloodline clause, he said finally. My father's legal assessment identified it. Yes. He commissioned the assessment 4 months before he died. Amara nodded. He knew the clause existed. He knew it could be exploited. He documented it specifically so whoever came after him would know to protect it. Jae-ho looked down at his hands. He never told me. He may not have found the right moment. If you hadn't taken that assessment when you left, Lim would have found it eventually. Amara held his gaze, but eventually wasn't fast enough. We needed it in the first month to understand exactly what we were building toward. He nodded slowly. Then he looked up. I want to see Choi. I know. She paused. But not tonight. Tonight we go through everything with Lim. Tomorrow you see Choi. He studied her for a moment. It was the look of a man accustomed to making decisions who had just realized that the person sitting across from him had been running the strategy for 7 months and knew it better than he did. Okay, he said. He reached for his phone. Tonight we work. He called Lim. She arrived within the hour with 2 associates and 4 folders, carrying the specific composure of a lawyer who had been preparing for this meeting for 6 months and had no intention of wasting a single minute. They worked until 3 in the morning. Lim laid out the case in sequence. The 3 photographs Amara had taken the night she left, now professionally authenticated. The 14 months of communications between Yoon and various Alliance family representatives, assembled through legitimate discovery channels. The bloodline clause, fully documented and cross-referenced with 3 precedent cases establishing its enforceability. And the pregnancy confirmed, documented, and dated to 7 weeks before the transfer timeline began, establishing the heir's legal existence within the window the clause required. Jae-ho read everything. He asked precise questions. Lim answered every one without hesitation. She had anticipated them weeks ago. At 2:47, Jae-ho set down the final document and looked across the table at Amara. This is enough, he said. It is more than enough, Lim replied. She closed the folder. Provided we file before the 7th. If Yoon's team files first and the transfer completes, even provisionally, the challenge becomes significantly more complex. We file on the 6th, Jae-ho said. 1 day before their window. That's what I recommend, Lim said. He nodded. Then he looked at Amara. 5 days. 5 days. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. He met with Director Choi the following morning. Choi was already in the office when Jae-ho arrived, sitting behind the desk he had occupied for 10 years. The same desk where he had managed the operational details of the Kwon Holdings with the quiet efficiency Jae-ho had always interpreted as loyalty. Now he understood it differently. Jae-ho closed the door. He did not sit down. Tell me, he said. From the beginning, everything. Choi looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. And he told him, Yoon had approached him 20 months earlier. The proposition had been straightforward. cooperate with the restructuring, or watch the holdings dismantled through a series of regulatory challenges. Yoon's team had already been preparing for 3 years. Choi had 2 younger brothers who depended on the salary his position provided. He had made a calculation. He wasn't proud of it, but he had made it. He had controlled the information Jae-ho received about Amara's disappearance. He had redirected the searches. He had fabricated the transfer record to make her departure look calculated and mercenary. He had introduced Sujin into Jae-ho's professional circle at Yoon's instruction. He had not known about the pregnancy. He had not known what Amara took when she left. He had believed she had simply gone. When he finished, Jae-ho was quiet for a long moment. 10 years. I know, Choi said. You managed everything for 10 years. Jae-ho's voice remained controlled. And then you sold it for your brother's salaries. Choi looked down at the desk. Yes. A pause. That's what I did. Jae-ho looked at him. Not with anger. Anger would have been easier. He looked at him with the specific clarity of a man who had just closed a door he knew he could never reopen. You are going to give Lim a full written account of everything Yoon's team asked you to do. Choi looked up. Every instruction, every communication, every redirected search, all of it. That implicates me directly. Yes. Jae-ho didn't hesitate. It does. Silence settled between them. And if I do this, Choi began carefully, what happens to... I don't make deals today. Jae-ho cut him off. Today, you give Lim the account. Everything else comes after. Choi stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Jae-ho left the office. He did not look back. Outside in the corridor, he stopped. For a moment, he placed one hand flat against the wall. 10 years. He had known Choi for 10 years. He took one slow breath. Then he straightened and walked toward the elevator. There were 4 days left. He wasn't going to spend a single hour of them standing still. 5 days. One filing. Everything Amara had built over 7 months was coming down to what happened next. Stay with this story, subscribe to Afro-Korean Folktales, and like this video, because they were almost at the ending. And it was the one Chairman Yoon had never seen coming. The next 4 days moved with the compressed intensity of a countdown everyone in the room could feel, but nobody was allowed to acknowledge out loud. Lim filed the legal challenge on the morning of the 6th day, 47 pages, 3 authenticated photographs. Choi's full written account, delivered to Lim's office on day 3 after a 6-hour session that left him looking like a man who had finally put down something he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it had weight. 14 months of communications between Yoon and the alliance families. The bloodline clause, supported by full precedent documentation and medical certification confirming the pregnancy, had been established 7 weeks before the transfer timeline began. At 9:17, Lim called Amara. The filing has been received and time-stamped. Amara was sitting at the kitchen table in Jae-ho's apartment with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Thank you, she said. She ended the call. For a moment, she simply sat there. Then she called Jae-ho. It is filed, she said when he answered. She heard him exhale. Just once. The specific exhale of a man releasing something he'd been holding for 4 days without fully acknowledging that he was holding it. Yoon's team will respond within hours, he said. Lim is ready for the response. We anticipated every counter-argument. There's nothing in their filing we haven't already addressed. I know. A pause. I know. Then, more quietly, how are you feeling? She considered the question honestly. Tired, she said. A small pause. And ready for this to be finished. Come to the office. Lim wants us both there when Yoon's response comes in. Amara stood. She picked up her bag. Before leaving, she looked around the apartment. The photograph from Busan was still on the shelf. The same keys she had left on the table 7 months ago were still there. The apartment had remained exactly as she remembered it, like a space that had been waiting for her without knowing it was waiting. She walked out, and this time, she didn't look back. She was done looking back. Yoon's response arrived at 11:43. Lim's team analyzed it within 90 minutes. 3 counter-arguments, all anticipated. The first was a procedural challenge to the authenticity of the photograph documents. It was dismissed by the authentication certificates Lim had commissioned in month 2. The second challenged the applicability of the bloodline clause. 3 precedent cases already included in the filing answered that. The third challenged the pregnancy timeline. Medical documentation had been prepared for exactly that argument. When Lim finished summarizing the response, she looked across the conference table at Amara and Jae-ho. They have no path through, she said simply. Jae-ho looked at Amara. She looked back at him. Neither spoke. Nothing needed to be said. 7 months of work had just held against everything Yoon's team had spent 22 months building. The math was complete. At 2:15, Lim's phone rang. She looked at the screen, answered. She listened for 40 seconds without speaking. Then, "Thank you." She ended the call. The room was silent. She looked at the table. Yoon's legal team has withdrawn the transfer filing. A pause. Effective immediately. She closed the folder. They've indicated that their client wishes to pursue private negotiation. There will be no negotiation, Jae-ho said. Lim nodded. I advised them of that likelihood. There was something almost clinical in her tone, the calm of a lawyer watching 6 months of preparation perform exactly as intended. Jae-ho nodded once. Then he looked at Amara. She was staring through the window. Seoul moved outside as it always did, luminous, indifferent, completely unbothered by anyone's private victory or anyone's private collapse. Amara. She turned. There was no triumph on her face. Something quieter. The specific stillness of a woman who had been running on purpose for 7 months and had just been told she could finally stop. It is done, she said. Jae-ho held her gaze. It is done. The baby came that evening. Not dramatically. Not with the cinematic urgency of a story that needs its ending to announce itself. Quietly. The way important things often arrive. Without warning, Amara had been sitting on the couch in Jae-ho's apartment, eating the first meal she'd managed to eat in 4 days without thinking about timelines, filings, or counterarguments. Then she knew. She called Jae-ho from the hospital car. He met her at the entrance. He didn't say anything. He simply walked beside her through the hospital doors with the steady presence of a man who had decided that whatever the next several hours required of him, he would provide completely. The baby arrived at 4:17 in the morning. Small, healthy, announcing herself to the world with the specific determination of someone who had been waiting a long time for the right moment and had decided this was it. Jae-ho was in the corridor when the nurse came out. He stood immediately. He looked at her face before she said anything. She smiled. Mother and baby are both well. She stepped aside. You can go in. Jae-ho stood in the doorway of the recovery room for a moment before entering. Amara was holding the baby, exhausted, steady, still processing the fact that after 7 months of planning, calculating, hiding, and fighting, it was finally over. The room was quiet. Outside, Seoul was beginning its early morning. The first delivery trucks moving, the first lights coming on in office buildings, the city recalibrating itself for another day, completely unaware of what had just happened in room 417. Jae-ho sat beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. It was the quiet of two people who had too much to say and had somehow agreed, without discussing it, to let the silence hold it for now. I named her while you were outside, Amara said. He looked at her. What did you name her? Seo. She looked down at the baby. It means clarity. Jae-ho looked at his daughter, at how small she was, at the face that was already doing what new faces always do, being completely themselves before the world has had a chance to tell them who they should become. Seo, he said. He let the name sit between them. And somehow, it felt exactly right. She deserves to know who she is from the beginning, Amara said. Her voice was quiet. No secrets, no hidden clauses, no one deciding her story before she's old enough to decide it herself. Jae-ho looked at her, at everything she had carried for 7 months. The 3 photographs taken on a phone at midnight in an apartment she was leaving. The 6 months in Busan working 12 hours a day. The 40 red roses he'd left on an airport bench because, suddenly, they had felt like the wrong thing to be holding. I would have helped you, he said quietly. She looked at him. I know. A small pause. Next time I will let you. He reached across and took her free hand. She let him. The baby made a small sound between them. Outside, the city continued its morning, completely indifferent to the fact that something had just been rebuilt in that room. Not perfectly, not without the weight of 7 months of silence pressing against every word they still had to say to each other, but honestly, with full knowledge of what it had cost and full certainty of what it was worth. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. Finalcita. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of what Amara carried, what it cost her, and what she built while nobody was watching like this video right now, every like tells YouTube this story matters and helps put it in front of more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to Afro Korean Folktales, because this is what we build here every single week. The woman they underestimated, the plan nobody saw coming, the ending they never prepared for, And I want to hear from you. What was the moment that got you? Was it the night she left with 3 photographs and 7 weeks of pregnancy nobody knew about? Was it what she said to Jae-ho in the airport? Or was it CO? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. And share this story with someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who protected everything she loved by disappearing and came back with enough to dismantle what it took them years to build. We'll see you in the next one.